there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere or sometime along an indefinable line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Makeshift Stories presents a monthly journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 224, Siren's Song of a Lost Phone. Read by Mitchell 2. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, the electronic call of a lost soul might draw you to your demise. I used to never leave home without my cell phone. That rectangular glass slab had almost become an extension of me. That is, until recently. Now I don't trust anything I get on the thing, and to be honest, I feel lucky to be alive. For my friend Drew, it was hard to tell where the device ended and Drew began. If the average person glanced at their cell phone 260 times a day, Drew averaged over 2,000. Drew was constantly checking, listening, tapping, photographing, or simply fondling the thing like a stress ball. He was an adventure traveler, posting selfies from exotic and all too frequently extremely dangerous locations. I had known Drew since childhood until 2 years ago when he suddenly disappeared. The last time I or anyone else heard from him was a selfie announcing he was off on a new adventure. He didn't mention where or how long he would be, and now all I have to remember Drew is the digital artifacts of our friendship, clogging my phone's history, and his social media posts, which reveal only the public surface of my lifelong friend. The real Drew, the Drew he kept out of those posts, the Drew I knew and loved, is documented in the messages and photos he sent only to me. It's not that I go through them often, it's enough just to know they're there. To delete that makeshift archive would feel like I was erasing the last evidence of Drew's existence from the world. At least, that's what I felt, until about a month ago. It was around the anniversary of Drew's disappearance, when the messages and calls began. The first one woke me up in the middle of the night. What? What time is it? I groaned, rolling onto my side. I had been in a deep, dreamless sleep and was disoriented. Without thinking, I groped for my glasses, poking one eye in the struggle to put them on, then grabbed for my cell phone. Its screen came to life in a burst of glaring white, forcing me to squint and focus my eyes so I could read the time. 3:30 a.m.? You've gotta be kidding, I complained to the empty room. The caller ID showed only 3 numbers. My brain was still waking up and running mostly on automatic, so I instinctively accepted the call. Hello? Who is this? I asked in a sleepy voice. Muffled sounds greeted my ears before I could make out the rustling of cloth, clicks, voices, and the pounding of surf on some distant shore. Who is this? You've pocket-dialed me, I accused in a surly tone, but no one responded. Instead, I heard more rustling, then the sound of feet scuffling on gravel, which abruptly stopped, a thud, like a bag of wet sand hitting something hard, then just the crash of waves against rock. Hello? Do you need help? I queried, concerned by the implied violence of the sounds. but the line abruptly cut off. I thumbed through the call history. Nothing was there. According to my phone, I hadn't received anything for hours. I didn't think much about that weird call, and to be truthful, had nearly forgotten about it, until I received a garbled text message 3 days later. All it consisted of was the number 49 with a dot, followed by 6 numbers, and on the next line, 57 and a dot, also followed by 6 numbers. It didn't mean anything to me. Assuming it was either a mistake or a junk message, I went to delete it, but found the usual meatball menu was missing, so there was no way to remove the offending message from my history. I tried rebooting my phone several times, but the message remained stubbornly menuless. Finally, suspecting the phone's software wasn't working correctly, I returned it to the dealer. After a few minutes of struggle and silent curses, the clerk put my SIM card into a new phone and handed it to me. That night, the new phone began to act strangely. It woke me again in the middle of the night. "What?" I cursed and grabbed the offensive device, assuming I had left some default ringtone on. But when I looked, the garbled text message was back, and the voicemail icon was blinking impatiently. Both had the same 3-number sender, 970, but while I was staring at the glowing screen, the numbers changed to 907, then to 709, then back to 970. It was as if the phone couldn't quite decide where the message had come from. Curiosity made me punch in my voicemail password. There was only one message which greeted me with the buffeting of wind. I was about to hang up when I thought I heard a faint voice, barely audible through the noise. "I'm here." At the same time, I got another text with more garbled numbers on 2 lines. Is this someone's idea of a joke? I growled to myself. I can't. No, I've been here. The voice struggled on, in a whisper, as if it was striving to find the right words. I'm lost. I'm lost. The wind noise suddenly surged, obscuring whatever it was the person on the other end was trying to say. The connection was abruptly cut off, leaving me listening to digital static for a few seconds. Then, unexpectedly, the phone began vibrating, and the identical text message slammed into it over and over again. Rows and rows of paired number sets, all the same, making the phone stutter and freeze in what I assumed could only be a denial of service attack. My heart racing, I turned the thing off. Disturbed by the call and the texts, I had trouble getting back to sleep, eventually falling into a restless dream. An unrelenting wind howled across a gray, rocky field with a trail snaking between jagged boulders worn into the concrete-like ground by generations of use. The wind was pushing me toward a rise which I couldn't see beyond. Suddenly, the landscape tilted like some great giant hand had lifted one end. I began to slide, my feet scrambling to find purchase, kicking rocks loose. They tumbled away and disappeared over the rise, which was now below me like the edge of a cliff. I fell onto my knees to keep from sliding, but the land kept tilting up and I began to slip. The plane had become a cliff, with waves crashing onto razor-sharp rocks far below. I lost my last desperate handhold. Then I was falling. The rocks hungrily jumped up toward me, and suddenly I was awake, sweating and breathing heavily, the sound of the waves crashing on rock still resonating in the room. Waves? Where was the sound coming from? I rolled onto my side and stared at my phone. The thing was on, and an alarm had gone off. The sound of the waves was coming from its tiny speaker. I grabbed the phone, dismissed the alarm, and the sound finally stopped. But how, I wondered, had the phone managed to turn itself back on? I checked the notifications. The voicemail was gone, and there was a cryptic, single message. Again, 2 numbers on separate lines. Frustrated, the next morning I returned the phone to the dealer again. "There's nothing wrong with the phone, sir." An overly confident 20-something sales associate, wearing a blue shirt with a button-down collar and a cheaply printed name tag, asserted in a demeaning tone. He continued to tell me how their company did everything technically possible to filter out robocalls and junk texts, and implied that I was technically inept, which angered me. "How did it turn itself back on then?" I argued. "And those repeating texts, what about them?" The sales associate glared at me, like a teacher who had just spent the last hour explaining a simple concept to a daydreaming student for the 10th time. "Maybe it wasn't really off, and have you simply tried blocking the number, sir? How can I block the number when there are only 3 digits? Take a look at one of the texts." He protested, claiming he wasn't allowed to look at personal data, while anxiously eyeing the growing line of customers building up behind me and starting to overflow back out into the mall. "It's not personal, and I'm giving you permission," I argued. With a reluctant shrug, he finally scrolled through the last couple of identical texts. "It's a GPS location," he declared, eyeing me like I was a Luddite. "And the phone number of the sender is truncated. Probably a robocall or something. It's not a problem with the phone or our network. You can report it as spam if you want." He handed the phone back to me dismissively, then nodded for the next customer to step forward. After that, the phone acted normal until my calendar app threw up a reminder, one I didn't remember setting. It was the anniversary of the day I had been told about Drew's disappearance. Weirded out, I immediately deleted the event. An hour later, it was back, chittering at me, and after that, every time I removed the thing, it came back within 5 minutes. I finally gave up and turned all notifications off. It seemed like a sadistic joke. But who would do such a thing, and why? Everyone knew I missed Drew, and still held out hope that he simply had chosen to drop out of sight for some obscure reason. None of them would do this. After his disappearance, the authorities had made a few preliminary investigations, discovering Drew had bought a plane ticket to Atlanta, changed to a flight to Montreal, and dropped off the map, then resurfaced online in a post a week later from somewhere along the northeast coast, claiming he'd just figured out what his next adventure was going to be. That was his last video selfie. Seeing his channel, they decided he had probably taken one risk too many. They sent out a missing person notice to all the parks up and down the coast popular with adventure tourists, then sat back and waited, claiming there was nothing else they could do. I stopped hounding them after 6 months, then became resigned to the idea they were most likely right. He would show up or not, and the longer it was, the more likely the latter would become permanent. I eventually had to accept Drew was gone. The voice on the other end of the connection enticed. "Who is this? "Leave me alone," I growled and hung up. The calls started 2 days after the weird calendar incident. Each time, my phone would ring despite being on silent mode, and each time it was the same, a barely audible voice saying over and over just 2 words, "Join me." Like the texts, the caller ID had only 3 numbers. Finally fed up, I tried to block the calls and was informed by some automated system the number was an area code, and if I proceeded, I would be blocking an entire region of the country. So, it appeared I was being sent a GPS coordinate and an area code, but was stunned when a few minutes of research revealed the coordinate was a remote location in the same region. Could it be Drew was throwing me clues to his whereabouts as part of some warped, cruel game he was documenting for his online audience? That would be just like him. It had been 2 years. 2 years struggling with the belief he had met some unfortunate end. Anger surged through me. Abruptly, my phone chimed with a new text. "Join me. I've told you where." The message encouraged. I threw the thing across the room. However, a week later, I found myself walking along the edge of a rocky gray windswept cliff. My jacket zipped, and my collar turned up against the bite of the salty gusts driven on shore by some distant fall storm out in the North Atlantic. Drew had always been drawn to remote, rugged locations, especially ones few tourists visited. How could I have resisted? He knew my curiosity would eventually overcome my anger. After flying into the only major airport in the region, I rented a car and drove for 7 hours until the road ended at a small fishing village, and from there, I took a ferry to an island with a rickety pier and a tiny collection of weathered buildings masquerading as a port. I had 5 hours before the ferry turned around to head back. Otherwise, I'd be stuck there for a week. The handheld GPS I had bought informed me the coordinates were only 2 kilometers down the coast, so I had just enough time to get there and back. Unsurprisingly, there was no cell service. So, if this was Drew who had been harassing me, he hadn't done it from here, which only made my curiosity burn stronger. The rocks along the cliff edge were slick from the ocean spray, and I had to be careful not to slip. Bundling myself against the cold and conscious of the time, I picked up my pace, glancing at the GPS to check my progress. Sometime later, it started to beep at me, and I found myself standing on a narrow cape which fell perilously away on 3 sides into the ocean far below. Beneath, the waves ate relentlessly away at the shoreline. Were they the same waves I had heard on the phone? Maybe. I wasn't sure. I looked around and found nothing other than rocks, lichen, moss, and a few stunted spruce trees. I could have been the first human to walk there in hundreds or thousands of years. In other words, it was the exact place Drew would have been drawn to. The GPS beeped louder and faster as I got closer to the spot. Finally, I was forced to stop when the land simply ended. However, the device insisted I needed to walk forward another meter or 2 beyond the edge of the cliff. Out of nowhere, I heard a ringtone echoing up from below, somehow making itself heard over the thundering surf. Getting down on my hands and knees, I carefully crawled to the precipice, searching the razor-edged rocks at the base of the cliff. I spotted the corner of something small and regular-shaped, something which didn't belong on a remote, rocky shore. It was tucked in so close to the base of the cliff, I had to lever my upper body out beyond the edge until I felt myself teetering precariously on the verge. It was only then I finally saw a little glowing rectangular patch lying on the rocks far below. It was a cell phone. I recognized its bright lime green waterproof case. It was Drew's. Suddenly, my cell, forgotten in my back pocket, began to vibrate. Instinctively, I reached for it. The movement was enough to change my center of gravity, and I felt myself slipping off the edge. Fear instantly gripped me. I was going over.
Give in to the siren call of the ocean. Join me.
Drew's voice implored from my phone, and for an instant, I wanted to do just that. Then, unexpectedly, my free hand somehow snagged on a sharp, rocky outcrop. I let go of my phone. It slipped through my fingers and tumbled down toward the gaping maw of the rocks to join whatever phantom had drawn me there. Then I desperately reached around and found another purchase, determined not to join it. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. To get other great APN podcasts, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com, where you'll find Glass Bookshop Radio. Each episode, listen in on conversations with interesting writers, publishers, and readers, produced by Edmonton's Glass Bookshop. This episode of Makeshift Stories is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network. APN connects Alberta podcast listeners to businesses and organizations in Alberta and around the world. Podcasters in our network are smart, creative, and engaging, providing an excellent way to reach local listeners and those around the world who enjoy our shows. Send us an email at hello@albertapodcastnetwork.com and we'll help you meet your goals. This episode of Makeshift Stories is also brought to you by the Alberta Association of Optometrists, proudly celebrating a century of caring for Albertans. It happens. Parents can easily miss their child's eye problems. Issues can occur in only one eye, making them difficult to notice. The earlier an eye health or vision problem is identified, the more likely it can be corrected. The I See, I Learn program provides an eye exam and free glasses, if needed, for kindergarten-age children. 25% of kids begin first grade with an undiagnosed eye problem. To book your child's eye exam, please visit optometrists.ab.ca. The Alberta Association of Optometrists represents almost 800 doctors of optometry in over 80 communities across the province. Members are highly trained, regulated health professionals who provide primary eye health and vision care to Albertans. Learn more at optometrists.ab.ca. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell II. Opening and closing themes composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by getting your friends to subscribe or follow wherever they listen to audio. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.